All right, welcome to today's briefing. Let's start with a question. What happens when an idea isn't just wrong, but forbidden? We're about to delve into something we're calling forbidden philosophy. Think of it as the architecture of suppressed knowledge. We're going to look at why it gets buried, and more importantly, what powerful forces are working to keep it there.
So, what do we actually mean by forbidden philosophy? Look, this isn't just about unpopular opinions or fringe theories. No, we're talking about knowledge that is actively suppressed. Deliberately pushed into the shadows by powerful mainstream institutions. And here's the kicker. These ideas are often buried not because they're false, but because they are deeply, profoundly inconvenient to the way things are. And that brings us to this idea right here. This quote, it really sets the stage for the core conflict we're exploring. The idea is that humanity isn't some finished product. We are instead this precarious bridge, almost like we're on a tightrope, walking between the easy animalistic comfort we crave and this terrifying infinite potential we could reach. It's that tension right there that's going to drive everything we talk about today.
Okay, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the architecture of stagnation. Then, we'll introduce the Red Specter's mission. After that, we'll meet the Guardians of the Cage, dive into a history suppressed, and finally, we'll explore what it means to go beyond the gilded cage. So, let's get into it. Part 1. The architecture of stagnation. We're going to start by defining the very thing we're trying to escape, this so-called gilded cage.
Now, when we say gilded cage, don't picture a literal prison with iron bars. It's more of a state of being, It's a world filled with what the source material calls wax fruit. Looks good, but offers no real substance. It's an unearned sanctuary, a place of curated luxury that shields us from any real pain, any agony of creation. But of course, there's a catch. There's always a price, and that price is stagnation. It's the loss of our spirit of becoming, that fundamental human drive to grow, to struggle, to evolve.
Okay, so if that's the cage, who's the one holding the bolt cutters? If this is the architecture of stagnation, who's the architect of its dismantlement? Well, that brings us right into our second section, where we meet a fascinating figure known only as the Red Specter.
So right off the bat, let's be clear. The Specter is no hero in shining armor, not even close. A better way to think of it is like a necessary antibody for a diseased system. Its job is to go on an intellectual salvage mission, digging up all that buried history. It's an internal architect of dismantlement, designed to find and exploit the weak points in the cage. And maybe most importantly, it acts as this uncanny hook, something both fascinating and deeply disturbing that grabs the comfortable elite and drags them kicking and screaming toward a brutal but absolutely necessary confrontation with reality.
And this really leads to a radical rethinking of what a savior even is. The Specter is called a shadow savior. Why? Because it doesn't offer you comfort. It doesn't come to heal you. No, it comes to reap the field of vanity. The gift it brings isn't a gentle blessing. It's a crimson gift, a splash of cold, hard, radical wisdom that you can only get by looking decay right in the face.
Now, obviously, a force this disruptive isn't just going to waltz in unopposed, right? It's going to meet some serious resistance. And that's what Section 3 is all about. We're going to deconstruct the Guardians of the Cage, the figures and forces that are actively fighting to keep everything just the way it is.
This opposition really comes from two directions. You've got the resistance from the masses, what Nietzsche famously called the last man. And then you have the resistance from the institution, which is personified in our text by a priest named Salvio Pallido. So think of it this way. One guards the cage from the inside, from the bottom up, and the other guards it from the outside, from the top down.
Let's break these two down because they represent the two main fronts in this philosophical war. First, you have the last man, who represents the masses. What's his motivation? Simple: safety, comfort, stagnation. His morality, which the source calls slave morality, is all about resentment. He calls anything strong, ambitious, or different evil, just so he can feel better about staying put. Then, on the other side, you've got the institution in the form of Salvio Pallido. He's all about the Pharisees' paradox. He puts on this big show of absolute moral authority, but it's all just a mask for his own spiritual stagnation. It's like he spends all his time polishing the silver floor of his abbey so he doesn't have to admit there's a gaping abyss right underneath it.
But beyond these two archetypes, there's a third guardian, and it might be the most powerful one of all. It's just the system, institutional inertia. It's this immense gravitational pull that our institutions have, this built-in resistance to any kind of change that threatens the status quo. In a way, it's the cage itself, defending itself.
Okay, so you might be thinking, this is all very interesting, but is it just an abstract philosophical game? Well, that's where we're going next. For Section 4, we're shifting gears. We're going to go full-on documentary investigation mode and look at a real historical case study that suggests the Gilded Cage and its guardians are very, very real.
So the question is, how does this actually work? How did mainstream institutions bury inconvenient truths? What are the actual mechanisms they use to protect their narrative and make sure threats to it just disappear?
Our case file centers on a figure from ancient Greece, Apollonius of Perga, the great geometer. Now, he's probably not a household name for most of us, and that's exactly the point. His work represented a level of thinking so profound that it was systematically, and it seems deliberately, pushed to the margins of history.
See, Apollonius wasn't just, calculating shipping routes or something practical like that. He was trying to map the fractal infinite. His work on what are now called Apollonian gaskets, these incredible, perfectly nested infinite sets of circles, this stuff offered a vision of reality that was just bewilderingly complex. It was a truth you couldn't slap on a bumper sticker. And that made it a direct threat to the simple, stable stories needed to keep people happy and comfortable inside the Gilded Cage.
And so here is the verdict from our investigation. Apollonius's work was intentionally cast into the shadowlands of human thought. Why? Not because he was wrong. No, it's because his ideas were too difficult, too messy, too inconvenient. This is intellectual censorship, plain and simple. It is a perfect, real-world example of the Gilded Cage in action. And it shows you exactly why a force like the Specter on its intellectual salvage mission is seen as not just useful, but absolutely essential.
Which brings us, finally, to the aftermath, our last section, beyond the Gilded Cage. What happens when this irresistible force of truth collides with the immovable object of comfort? What's the real consequence?
What it all boils down to is a choice, a fundamental choice between two paths. On one side, you have the slave morality of the valley. That's the one that says safety is everything, and anything that aims for greatness is dangerous and must be condemned. And on the other side, the spirit of becoming, the path that's painful, it's dangerous for sure, but it's the only path toward realizing our actual infinite potential.
And so you see, the Specter's role, its role as the indispensable shadow, it's not just about tearing things down for the fun of it. The whole purpose is corrective. It's to find that forbidden knowledge, the difficult truths from people like Apollonius, and drag it, kicking and screaming, back into the light. And in doing that, it challenges the very foundation of the cage we've built.
When you look at it through this lens, the collapse of a stagnant society, well, it stops looking like a tragedy. This quote here frames it as something else entirely, a deserved and justified consequence. The Great Noon, which is described as the peak of human arrogance, isn't just some random disaster. It's a reckoning, one that was earned step by step every time we chose comfort over growth.
So what's on the other side of that reckoning? Well, it's not a return to the easy life, not at all. It's something the text calls the difficult sun. And this isn't the gentle morning light you get down in the valley. Oh no, this is a harsh, blinding truth. It's a light so bright it takes real strength just to look at it. There's no sanctuary here, only a terrifying, searing clarity.
And so, we're going to end this briefing by turning the central question squarely back on you. After exploring this entire architecture of forbidden thought, we're left with this. Is the comfort of the cage, the curated safety, the unearned sanctuary, is it really worth the price? And what is that price? It's forfeiting our infinite potential. That's the question left hanging in the air long after the Specter's work is done.